You are 22 years old. You are a female. What would you be able to do? Before I begin, let me tell you a story. In 2020, when I began my work with the Green Africa Youth Organization, I was entitled to scale the project called the Zero Waste Cities to a different city. When I went into the city, I had to reach out to municipal assembly in one of the metropolitan areas. And when I got there, I spent close to 6 months trying to meet the director in that organization, so the municipal assembly. With time, I was able to go meet him, and finally I entered the office. And when I entered the office that day, I sat down with him, looking at him face to face. I had to describe or inform you of the project we were coming to do and request for him to partner with Gaio and also support the project. So I spoke to him. I sat down there that day and I said everything I wanted to say. And he just looked at me and he said, "You are 22 years old. You are a female. What would you be able to do?" That statement struck me a lot. However, today, that was the same project that won the Headshot Prize last year for Gaio. And myself and that director now, we are best friends. Now I'm going to ask you guys 3 questions from this story. And I want you to, in the chat box, write out which key theme you think resonated with you in this project, in this story I just told you, sorry. The first theme I would call is youth capability. The second theme I'll call is zero waste. And the second theme I'm going to call is rising through the ranks. In the chat box, I want you to indicate which of this theme you think resonated with this particular story I just told you. The person who will be able to get the right theme would receive something at the end of the workshop. So let me entice you a little bit. The first theme is zero waste. The second theme is youth capability. And the third theme is rising through the ranks. Okay, I'm happy to hear why some people are saying youth capability. Are people just following the first person, or it's really youth capability? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of good comments in the chat, but I believe you left rising through the ranks and also the main issue, gender consent. Okay, it's my option, guys. Okay, someone says rising through the ranks. I see, rising through the ranks. Okay, so the answer is, are we done? The answer is, unfortunately, guys, the answer is youth capability. That is the strongest theme that resonated with this story. In between, I'm going to share another story with you, and I'm happy to hear what theme resonates with you. Before the end of this session, I'm happy to have been able to walk you through these 4 areas to understand the core structure of powerful stories, to learn how to visually plan stories using storyboarding, to discover how to align your stories with your campaign goals, and then lastly, for you to build your own story idea, because the BISA team informed me that they would want you to build your own story idea and use that to build your own stories for the project that you do. To begin with, When it comes to stories, it's very important. I think it has been underestimated. The relevance has been underestimated because of how very powerful it has been. And I'll use myself as a case study. Story has really been a powerful tool for me. I started storytelling not just because I knew it was good, but it just became part of me. I think I grew up in a setting where I kept on hearing stories and I felt, okay, why don't I just use it? And since I started using stories, my life has changed for the better. And everywhere I find myself, I keep on using stories, and it just keeps on paving way for me because people get to relate to whatever I'm saying. And on this slide, you see that, yes, it's true, people don't really remember so much of statistics. They remember stories. Just recently, I was in Austria, and I had to make a presentation on energy issues within communities, and then what policymakers in the room can do to respond or bridge the gaps that communities are facing. And when I got there, I just did not start that energy is a huge issue in communities, and then people are struggling, or 5,000 women do not have access to electricity, or you see that kind of thing. I didn't start that way. This is how I started, guys. At a young age, I remember learning under the candlelight. My mother had no source of income. If it wasn't a candlelight, I'll use a lantern with kerosene. And every night before I go to bed, she would tell me to put off the candle or kerosene. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I do not put off that candle or kerosene. Our house could burn down to the ground. Guys, I didn't just, I used few storylines to communicate the challenges of lack of access to energy, and even the issue that could emanate from using other alternative sources of energy that is not really good to communities. I don't know if you felt that in that story. The reason why I'm telling you this is, I know most of you would say, okay, I work for an NGO. How do I then use my own personal narrative to communicate the story? Or how do we communicate the story if you're just talking about the broader organization? I'm happy to share more of that with you going forward. So yes, zero is a very technical topic. I know it's very, very technical because recently Gaio wanted to employ a zero waste director. And I think people do not even understand the title, Zero Waste Director. People feel it's just about plastic recycling. But I'm happy I have seen several of the speakers talk about the fact that zero waste doesn't just end at recycling, but it goes beyond. It also goes to advocacy, goes to other key themes. So yes, with a well-structured story, you can move people to act, you can shift mindset, you can build visibility for your work, and very most importantly, raise funds. Most of the funds that I have raised for my organization, Gaio, has been story-related. You meet a funder in a conference or wherever you meet the person, and you don't just start by saying, in our organization we have been able to support 25 communities with grid solar energy or just those things. No, rather you go more relationship wise. We started Gaio as a youth-led, and today we are growing to serve the needs of women, men in communities. You see that very relational conversation. So it doesn't just end at only even your videos or your blogs, but it goes beyond to support your fundraising. I know most of you here could be executive directors or communication leads, but it's very important that you take note of this and go beyond just developing videos to communicating using stories. Now, in a global landscape, there are a lot of frameworks for developing a good story. And from research, I have been able to come across like 7 frameworks. But for the purpose of today's presentation, I'm happy to guide you through one of that, the hero's journey. And with the hero journey, we will talk about the storyboarding. But in this framework, we have the 3-act structure. We have hero's journey, Dan Harmon's story cycle. Sometimes when hero's journey, you can alternate Dan Harmon's story structure in place of hero's journey. And you can also have Freitag's pyramid, 7-point story structure, fintech curve. You can go and read more on this, but for today's presentation, I'll be taking you through the hero's journey, transformational stories. And for this, you are looking at it has its cycle, but it's more like a character leaves home, faces trials, transforms, and returns change. So that kind of flow, that's what it has. So now, just to boil down into the hero's journey, let's take a look at the act of the hero's journey. How do you really employ the hero's journey in your storytelling when you're developing either a video or a blog? There are different stages when it comes to the hero's journey, and most of the time, if you do little research, you see that the stages are the ordinary world, call to adventure, refusal, mentor. But for the purpose of this capacity building, I was able to structure it in 3 acts. So departure, initiation, and return. And for departure, you'd see the ordinary world, what is happening currently. An example is you tell a story saying a community faces waste crisis, and then you go to the call for adventure. So this is where you see someone taking an initiative. Then you have the story of Betty Osei Bonsu decided to convert palm kernel shells to charcoal briquette. Then you see the refusal and the mentor. The refusal is, however, there were no equipment in the laboratory for her in school to be able to make this conversion, or or there was no funds. She didn't have funds to make this conversion possible. However, then you see the mentor. However, things changed. She met a supervisor who was willing to fund her, or she placed a call to her father that day, and the father decided to give her some money to make this possible. So you see the youth inspired but unsure. So with the uncertainty was where I was debating on if I should do it, because I didn't have funds and I didn't have also equipment in my laboratory or in my school's laboratory. Then go to the next section of initiation. So the threshold, the trials, the ordeal, the reward. Here as well, you see a lot of the challenges being encountered here during probably the preparation. So if I'm talking about the conversion of palm kernel shells to charcoal briquette, then I can start talking about the pushback from community on if that particular product was really good for them, if they can purchase that product, or if they will see the value of their money for that particular product, right? And here there's another example of, so in order to curb the waste crisis in the community, they organize cleanups. But then even in this cleanup organizing, they face resistance. And in your various programs, facing resistance here could be people still dump after you've cleaned, or people still do not understand how to properly segregate their waste to get the waste with more value to exchange for money, etc. And then you see the area of reward, which is create innovation. So this way, okay, we've been able to collect this waste, use it to create something that has value to communities, and then you get to return. So this is where you become stable. What happens after this change you've created? What happens after? So you hear the roadblock, the resurrection, the return with elixir. I'm happy to share more of this elixir later. but it just talks more about the gain to the communities. So possibly for my project that I started talking to you about, I would say that previously, communities, when they utilize firewood in homes, women can get respiratory tract diseases or issues. Children can have pollution issues, indoor pollution issues. But now they were able to switch from charcoal briquette from firewood to charcoal briquette. It has less intensive pollution, or also the emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is reduced as well.